Welcome back to the lesson, dear learners. Today we are at the final leg of the story. This is the final part of the story. The story is about a young boy, French, who is going to school. When he reaches the school, out of fear that he has not done his homework and he was late as well, he was surprised to see that the teachers did not punish him and he was sent to his seat. So when he saw in the classroom, he found that the villagers had gathered in the classroom and the teachers was wearing a special dress on that day. So there were so many other things that surprised the French, who is the narrator as well. Then he came to know that that day was the last day of learning French language in the class, because the order had come from Berlin that only German would be taught in the district of Alsace and Lorraine. So he was very much disappointed because he had not learned, and he understood why teacher was wearing the dress, why the villagers were gathered in the classroom, and why everyone was so quiet. So the teacher M. Hamel told the class as well as to French that it is a very bad luck. This is a misfortune of Alsace that the countrymen, the citizen of the districts, did not learn the French lesson, French language, and now the German, the Persian will come and they will doubt on your citizenship of French. They will laugh at you that you don't know your mother tongue, and still they claim to be Frenchmen. So he also tells who is the responsible for it. He himself, the teacher, as well as the parents. The students, parents and teachers, he blamed all the three for not learning French language. So today we will go ahead. Here we have already gone through. Then from one thing to another, M. Hamel went on to talk of the French language, saying that it was the most beautiful language in the world, the clearest, the most logical, that we must guard it among us and never forget it. Because when a people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they had the key to their prison. Then he opened a grammar and read us our lesson. I amazed to see how well I understood it. All he said seemed so easy, so easy. I think too that I had never listened so carefully and that he had never explained everything with so much patience. It seemed almost as if the poor man wanted to give us all he knew before going away, and to put it all into our heads at one stroke. So in this paragraph, we will get the explanation of this part. Then from one thing to another, M. Hamel went on to talk of the French language. He tried to explain each and every aspect of French language, saying that it was the most beautiful language in the world, the clearest one, the most logical language as far as grammar is concerned, that we must guard it among us and never forget it. He says, he instructed us that we should guard, we should protect. Guard means to protect the language among us, and they should never forget it, the language, because when a people are enslaved, when the people are under the custody of enemy country, when the people are captured, when a district, when a geography, when a society is captured by the enemy country, as long as they hold fast to their language means they keep their language firmly intact with them, means they do not leave their language. It is as if they had the key to their prison. So the language becomes the key to the prison, because when a ruler rules a country, the first thing the ruler wants that the country should adopt the language of the ruler so that he could conveniently rule the country. As the Britishers came to India, so their first target was to change the language to produce the servants for them, the people to serve them, and because he wanted to learn the language, because they wanted that the Indians should learn the English so that they could help them in the governance. So he also said the same thing, that if you keep your language with you, if you love your language, if you do not forget your language, it would become a key to your prison, means that will help you to get freedom from enemy country. Then he opened a grammar and read us our lesson. So then he gave the grammar lessons to us. I was amazed to see how well I understood it. So it was amazing to me on that day that the teacher who seems cranky to me was explaining and I was understanding everything. All he said seemed so easy, so easy. Very, very easy everything seemed to me. I think too that I had never listened so carefully. He never taught so brightly and I never paid attention to his teaching so carefully, and that he had never explained everything with so much patience. So with all the patience, with keeping all the emotions with him. Patience means one patience means if you control your emotion, you are showing your patience. It seemed almost as if that poor man wanted to give us all he knew. So the way he was teaching made an impression as if the poor man means M. Hamel. He wanted to give all the information he knew about the French language and other to us at one go, and to put it all into our heads at one stroke. On the one go, he wanted to transfer everything he had in his mind into our minds. So you can see the map of France. It is already explained in the beginning that France and then Germany, and the dotted line is the place Lorraine and Alsace, where the Persian soldiers have captured, and the French M. Hamel lives in the same region. Going forward, yes, this was the map of 1870 and 1871. So presently the map may have changed. You can refer it in the world map or in the globe. On the globe you can see the map. After the grammar, we had a lesson in writing. That day, M. Hamel had new copies for us, written in a beautiful round hand, France, Alsace, France, Alsace. They looked like little flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rod at the top of our desks. You ought to have seen how everyone set to work and how quiet it was. The only sound was the scratching of pens over the paper. Once some beetle flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them, not even the littlest one, who worked right on tracing their fishhook, as if that was French too. On the roof, the pigeon cooed very low, and I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? So, in this paragraph, the writer further elaborated what the teacher did in the classroom. After talking about the French language, its importance and all that, he gave a grammar lesson and then writing. The teacher himself had brought copies, notebooks we call it, copies for them, and on the top of each notebook was written a round hand, means in a cursive writing, it was written France, Alsace, France, Alsace. So they have to repeat the same phrase on the succeeding lines as you do in your to improve your handwriting. So this was a writing drill to the students by the teachers. They looked like the little flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rod at the top of our desks. It seemed as if those copies, those notebooks were flag hanging on the top of the desk, the flag of their country, France. Means even in them, in the notebooks, the narrator saw the patriotism. So the notebooks seemed to the narrator as if the notebooks are the flag. You ought to have seen how everyone set to work and how quiet it was. You might have seen this in your classroom when everybody is busy in doing his or her work. So how quiet the classroom is. There is a noise, but noise of paper and scratching of pen and all that. Otherwise, the classroom remains all silent. The only sound was the scratching of the pens. Scratching means when you rub the pen on the paper, then the sound is called scratching sound of pens over the paper. Once some beetle flew in. Beetles, small insect with a wing. It came in the classroom, it flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them. And you can imagine when when a beetle flies inside the classroom, then everybody tries to save himself or pretend to save and to make a fun of the things. That beetles become a thing of fun for the students in the classroom. But on that day, nobody paid any attention to them. Not even the littlest, means the youngest ones. One who worked right on tracing their fish hooks with their pen, fish hooks, a kind of writing stuff. Fish hooks are especially used with the long handles. Fish hooks is attached, and then with the help of ink, we write with these fish hooks. As if that was French too. On the roof, the pigeon cooed very low. The pigeon is a kind of bird, you would have seen the pigeons. On the roof, the pigeon, it is on the houses and always live very close to the human inhabitants. So on the roof, the pigeons cooed. Cooed means it produced means the sound. The sound of the pigeon is called cooing. So past tense, cooed. Pigeons cooed very low, in a low voice. And I thought to myself, the narrator thought to himself, what he thought? He thought that would they make them, means the pigeon, sing in German? Means when our teacher will leave, when the German teacher will come, when we will totally governed by the German people, will the pigeon change his or its cooing, or will it remain the same? So it has so many meanings. Perhaps the narrator, the writer wants to say that you can change the mind of the people, but you cannot change the heart. You can rule the territory, but you cannot rule the heart, because the pigeon's heart can only coo in a way it is cooing. No other ruler can come and change its cooing. So the French people love their language. They cannot be transformed into a German people. So this is the referential, or you can correlate the statement. So here we have some questions for you. You can write down the answers in the message box in one or two words or in a sentence. What was French expected to be prepared with for school that day? So it is already taught to you in the beginning. What did French notice that was unusual about the school that day? Something unusual he noticed. It was not a common, it was not a classroom that he usually see. Something unusual was there about teacher, class and all that. You will write down. What had been put up on the bulletin board? Means what news was put up on the bulletin board. So going ahead. Whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw M. Hamel sitting motionless in a chair and gazing first at one thing, then at another, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little schoolroom. Fancy. For 40 years he had been there, in the same place, with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him, just like that. Only the desks and the benches had been worn smooth, the walnut trees in the garden were taller, and the hopvine that he had planted himself twined about the windows to the roof. How it must have broken his heart to leave it all, poor man, to hear his sister moving about in the room above packing their trunks, for they must leave the country next day. But he had the courage to hear every lesson to the very last. After the writing, we had a lesson in history, and then the baby chanted there, ba, bi, bo, boo. Down there at the back of the room, old Hauser had put on his spectacles and, holding his primer in both hands, spelled the letters with them. You could see that he too was crying. His voice trembled with emotion, and it was so funny to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry. Ah, how well I remember it, that last lesson. All at once the church clock struck 12, then the Angelus. At the same moment, the trumpets of Persian returning from drill sounded under our window. M. Hamel stood up, very pale, in his chair. I never saw him look so tall. My friends, said he. But something choked him. He could not go on. Then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and bearing on with all his might, he wrote as large as he could, Vive la France. Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall, and without a word, He made a gesture to us with his hands. School is dismissed. You may go. In these final lines, the writer has evolved, has successfully created an emotional environment, because the teacher was so keen to teach, the students are also very keen to learn, and the lesson is the last lesson of French language. They are doing their writing work. So the French or the narrator says that I was also writing very carefully, but in the meantime I looked up at M. Hamel. I saw he was sitting motionless, means without any movement. He was sitting still in the same posture on his chair. In his chair, there's a difference between in his chair and on his chair. You will find it out. In his chair means when the shape of chair is very different than the on his chair's shape, means the chair of different types. So in his chair, you can discuss this in the classroom with your teacher, in his chair and on his chair, according to the type of chair we use the term. And he was gazing first at one thing, then another. Means M. Hamel was gazing, looking intently. Gazing means looking intently, first at one thing in the classroom and in the garden, in his surrounding, then at the another thing, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little schoolroom. Fancy, for 40 years. Imagine, he had served there for 40 years. He had been there in the same place with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him. He has spent the life in the same way, where he has a garden outside and a window in front of him. Only the desk and the benches had been worn smooth. Worn smooth means when you use again and again a wooden piece, it gets smoothened. It gets smooth, soft. So the benches and desks have smoothened by the frequent use of the students. The walnut tree in the garden were taller, and the hawthorn that he had planted, the trees and the vines, the creepers he has planted, had twined about the window to the roof, had grown tall up to the window. How it must have broken his heart. Means he has done everything in that school, all the things you can see that students and the villager can see in the schools were done by M. Hamel himself. So it must have broken his heart. It was a heartbreaking thing to him to leave the place all at once. He was a poor man, to leave the place, to hear his sister moving about. And he can also listen the sound of the packing. His sister was packing the items on the upper floor. So he can, or the students, everybody in the classroom can listen, can hear the sound of moving things, trunks and etc. For means because they must leave, they have to leave the country the next day. But he had the courage to hear every lesson. He was so emotional. Still, he was there to finish his last lesson. After the writing, we had a lesson in history, and then the baby chanted. Chanted means they pronounced, they told their alphabets, French alphabet, ba, be, bo, you. Down there at the back of the room, old Hauser had put on the spectacles. Now the old Hauser, that old man sitting in the classroom, he had his spectacles on his eyes, holding his primer in both hands, that books of alphabets. He picked that book in his hand, spelled the letter with them, and he also trying to spell the letter. He was also trying to read the letters. You could see that he too was crying. He was also crying. His eyes was welled up. His throat was choking. His voice trembled, shaky voice, not very clearly coming out of his throat because he was so sentimental with emotion. And it was so funny to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry. And the way he was reading in a trembling voice, he was crying, his eyes was filled up. So the way he was reading means it seems as if it causes a fun as well as a cry in us. Means we wanted to laugh on his voice as well as we wanted to cry. We wanted to weep with him for our misfortune. How well I remember that last lesson. All at once the church clock struck 12. Then there was a sound from the church clock. It was 12 o'clock. Then the Angelus, the next church, it also from another place, the sound of 12 o'clock, the struck 12. At the same moment, the trumpets means the sound of falling foot. So when soldiers or some people steps together, so here especially for the Persian soldiers, trumpets, the sound of stepping. Returning from drill means exercise. They were coming back from their exercise. Sounded under our window. Sounded means we listen the sound of their trumpets, footsteps under our window. Hamel stood up. He stood up from his chair. He was very pale, means his face become a bit yellow in his chair to see the Persian soldiers. I never saw him look so tall. And when I look at the Hamel, I found that he was so tall, very tall on that day. And the respect was so high for him from me as a student because of in front of those Persian people, soldiers. My friends, he said, my friends, said he, I, but something choked him. Choked means when you get stuck something in your throat. You want to speak but can't speak because of the emotion, because you have gotten sentimental. He could not go on. He could not go on means he could not continue to speak. Then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and bearing on with all his might, he took a chalk, went to the blackboard, and he put all his strength on that chalk and wrote on the board, on that blackboard, in a large as he could, means largest size, large sized. So the letters, vive la France, means France, long live France. Then he stopped and leaned. Then he stopped there. Then he leaned means bent his head against the wall. Then he stopped there writing, leaned his head, bent, turned his head towards the wall, against the wall, and without a word, without saying anything, because he was crying, he was so emotional, he was not able to speak. He made a gesture. He made us a gesture by his hand. He gave an expression by shaking his hands or something to us with his hand. School is dismissed, you may go. School is over, now you may go to your home. This was the gesture. So this is the end of the story. You will take a screenshot of these questions and you will write down the answers. Other than this, there are some more questions. If you will go through this sometime in the next session, we will discuss this question and answer. Or in the after this, we will have some either grammar or some listening and speaking drill, or we can say the classes. We will have some classes on speaking skill and listening skill. So thank you very much, dear students. You do the questions and answers. You will finish this. We have already finished the lesson. You will finish the exercise yourself. If you have any doubt, please write me on my Telegram channel. You can write the questions there. All the answers you will get. And for some time, we'll go for another like creative writing or for ASL. Then you'll come back to the poem My Mother at 66. So thank you so much. Thanks for watching.